Hello and welcome to Growth Under Pressure, a conversation from the World Economic Forum as part of the 2025 Sustainable Development Impact Meetings. We are here in New York for UN General Assembly Week. I am Stacey Vanek, a reporter for Bloomberg Business Week and host of the podcast Everybody's Business. And I'm very lucky to be joined this afternoon by Dr. Vera Songwe, who is the chair and founder of the Liquidity and Sustainability Facility. It works to promote and expand sustainable investment in Africa. She also headed the Economic Commission for Africa at the UN. She has worked at the World Bank and is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. I could go on, but I will stop there. We're very lucky to have her here. Welcome, Dr. Songwe.
Nice to be here. It's a pleasure.
Before we get into the global economy, I wanted to play you some tape from our podcast. So every week we talk about a business or economic question, and then I go out onto the streets of New York or wherever I am and ask people this question. So this last week I asked people how they were feeling about the economy, and the answers really struck me, and I thought it might be an interesting place to start our discussion. So we'll play that tape right now. How do you feel about the economy right now?
Not good. All the prices are going up and up, especially food shopping. Before you could just put everything in your cart, and now you have to start cutting back on things.
I came here because this is the only thing I can afford right now.
The pizza, the $1.50 pizza slice?
Yeah, the dollar slice, yeah. When I get a job, I think I'm going to go back to like chicken, eggs.
Eggs are like a luxury a little bit?
Exactly.
The cost of living is going up. And mind you, the wage is barely going up. You know, you gotta pay your bills, but you gotta have money to eat. It's hard out here being in New York, you know what I'm saying?
So I'm wondering, as an economist, I mean, you look at international trends, bond markets, but also the way the economy affects us all. I'm wondering what strikes you about these answers.
I think two things. First of all, of course, you did the survey in New York City.
I did.
I sit here talking a little bit more about the emerging markets, and it's not surprising. I think the latest numbers that the IMF show is that the advanced economies today are growing at a maximum at 1 to 1.5% growth rates. The United States used to grow at 2.8, for example. However, in the emerging market economies, we're seeing some strong growth in a few economies. And some of what is happening is there is a lot of resources that are leaving the advanced economies looking for better yields in the emerging markets. And so we're seeing some capital flowing in that direction that is creating growth in emerging market economies. So we have economies, for example, in Africa. Cote d'Ivoire is doing well. Angola is doing well. We have economies that are, beginning. Of course, all of us, advanced economies and emerging market economies, are coming out of COVID. We're coming out of, high inflation, expensive cost of living, particularly in the emerging markets. We saw a lot of our economies with depreciation. So, cost of living got really, really hard. But then we also had the climate shock. So there are a couple of drivers that I think are affecting not only the emerging markets, but also the advanced economies. And as markets hopefully begin to stabilize, we will see a lot more. So it's not surprising. And then supply chains. When we heard, I think, some of the conversation about the cost increasing, because now supply chains have broken. We have fragmented supply chains, which makes production more expensive. And so the cost of goods globally is becoming more expensive. And that is why trade is such an important component to the conversation that we're having. I think that when we talk about, where is global trade going, interestingly enough, global trade numbers are not going down that dramatically. There is a rearranging of the deck in terms of where trade is happening and how it's happening. But in this interim period, we're seeing a little bit of inefficiencies, which is creating pressure on the cost of goods and commodities. So people are feeling that pressure. Of course, we are also seeing increases in the cost of labor in some economies, and that is creating some of the pressures. But as we talk about increases in the cost of labor in some jurisdictions, we are also seeing excess capacity in others. And again, unemployment in many emerging market economies, these economies are ready to begin to swallow and grab, some of this new productive potential. What we are seeing when we look at some of the drivers of growth in America in particular is the whole AI data center construction, right?
Very much.
AI, in all of its elements is one of the huge growth sectors, which is creating a lot of new wealth. And the emerging markets now are beginning to also produce data centers. Energy is cheaper in some of those geographies. And so you see, I think, some of the emerging markets feeling less stressed out. But what is the most important for emerging markets is that when the G7 economies do not grow as fast, the rest of the world takes a little bit of a hit. So it is in everybody's interest that at least the G7 economies, the United States in particular, and China to a large extent, because we have this sort of two poles. China pulls the East, and the United States pulls a lot of the Western economies, particularly the economies in the Western Hemisphere, Mexico and Latin America. I think we need these two economies to continue to grow so that the rest can get pulled up.
So before we go more global, I wanted to go a little more national. So you grew up in Cameroon. It's a big exporter, big exporting country, a lot of agriculture, a lot of cocoa, a lot of coffee, and other big products. What is happening in the economy right there? If we went out and talked to people on the streets of Cameroon about how they were feeling about the economy, what would they say? Are they seeing the growth you're talking about, or what are things like there?
Cameroon is an interesting economy because Cameroon has mineral resources. It also is an agricultural economy, and it has a service economy. Over 50% of its GDP is in the service sector. And so there is a lot of innovation happening in the service sector, but we have a lot of constraints in some of the key drivers of growth, which is the right infrastructure. One of the big drivers of growth today is infrastructure. We don't have the right infrastructure.
Is that like roads and?
That's roads, that's telecommunication. I just talked about AI and the importance of AI, because with AI you can create your own jobs. And so yes, we do have connectivity, but we do not have the speed and scale. Right? It's not enough to be connected to the internet. You want to be able to be connected at the millisecond. Right, and so essentially you need quick connectivity, and you need the price to go down so that you can actually, if somebody were going to consume your service globally, somebody was in the Philippines, say, or the Philippines has perfect connectivity, so they do the back office. Today in Africa, we have many African countries, Senegal, Rwanda, Benin, all doing back office services, Madagascar doing back office services. I think Cameroon would like to do that as well.
What are back office services?
Answering the telephone, playing the role, call centers, exactly. And I think that there's a lot more opportunity. In Asia, there's about 100,000 jobs in this sectors. Some of it is going to start migrating to the continent, but for it to migrate effectively, and for the youth in Cameroon in particular to see the benefits of that migration, we need better infrastructure, we need better roads, we need better internet connectivity, and then of course you need better health and social services. But all of this is coming at a time when the cost of capital for the continent, Cameroon and otherwise, is quite expensive. So even if the government had in its growth plans the desire to build, we just completed the third hydro dam. Even if we wanted to do another electricity base load provider, we will need capital, and capital is expensive.
It's expensive to borrow money.
That challenge of trying to borrow money at affordable rates, continues to be critical for Cameroon, as it is for many of the emerging market economies. So if you went to Cameroon today, I think you will hear from many of the youth, we need better infrastructure, we need certainty in the economic investment environment. There's a lot of youth that are coming out that want to start their own businesses. They would love for the regulatory framework to make it easier for them as local youth to be able to set up a business in a day, as it is in some African countries.
To go a little broader, you've written quite a bit about how to grow the economies in Africa through trade and alliances. Obviously, this year, we've seen huge disruptions to that, and the tariffs that the Trump administration has put in place, some of the highest are on African countries, sometimes 30, even 50% on some countries, though mostly 15%. How has that affected economic growth in Africa?
Clearly has had, of course, for some of the countries, and I think, we had the trade relationships, which we've been talking about, AGOA, the Growth and Opportunity Act that was passed, which was essentially to help ensure that, we had better trade between the United States and Africa. many of the countries that did everything that they needed to do right so that they could benefit from AGOA are unfortunately some of those that have been penalized. And we did an article on this in Project Syndicate, talking about that. I think what that tells the Africans in particular, and I talked about supply chains, is we have something we call the landmark Africa Growth Program. It's the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Essentially, it says Africa needs to trade much better with itself. Today, Africa does not trade as much. Africa trades somewhere in the order of 20%. If I was being very generous, intra-Africa trade is 20%. If you went to Europe, inter-European trade is over 68%. If you went to Asia, it's 75%. We need to trade much more with each other. So I take the case of, say, Lesotho. Lesotho trades a lot. It's one of the countries that had high tariffs put upon it. A lot of its trade is textiles, clothing. Kenya imports 10 times as much clothing from the United States as Lesotho exports to the United States. So maybe there is some discussion between Lesotho and Kenya to talk about, can we do better trading with each other? We've seen Rwanda begin to develop a textile industry, which is essentially servicing the sub-region. Nigeria used to have a very strong textile industry. So I think there is work there that can be done. I think today we see Nigeria has just set up the largest refinery on the continent. A lot of the fossil fuel that used to be exported into America to be refined and sent back to the continent can now be done on the continent. And so again, intra-Africa trade, if we started using some of the goods that we produce on the continent even better, maybe the goods that we end up exporting to the United States will be high value critical minerals. There's 50 critical minerals that the United States needs. Africa has about 25 of them. And so essentially, we still do have a lot of trade, and some of them got exceptions in the sort of overall tariff rates that were readjusted by the administration. So I think there is opportunity in some places, and in where we have seen the tariffs, I think there is intra-Africa trade that needs to happen. Of course, tariffs sometimes in some of these economies create inefficiencies and misallocation. And so we hope that intra-Africa, we can then help to smooth some of that misallocation by trading better with each other.
Why has there been not as much intra-Africa trade up until now? And will tariffs possibly change that?
We have three reasons why there hasn't been much of it. I think the first one is non-tariff barriers. There's a number of non-tariff barriers on the continent. It's very difficult to move goods because of different specifications. And a lot of what the AFCFTA is doing, and a lot of work has been done so far by the AFCFTA Secretariat in Ghana and the leadership on the continent, is essentially trying to see whether we can peel off those barriers. And we have now work that's being done under what we are calling the rules of origin, which is allowing goods to flow much more freely. The second one, of course, is we have currency constraints. We are a continent that is not using the same currency, but it's not so much the use of the currency, it's the clearing houses for those currencies that is not as efficient. And so payment systems, we see in the United States, we have the Genius Act today, and the conversations around maybe looking at new systems of payment systems that are much improved. I think if we could make our payment systems a lot better, through the banking system, ensure that clearing happens much, much faster. In the United States, if you purchase a commodity, within 12 hours, that transaction is cleared and the commodity begins to move. In many of our economies, if you purchase something, say in Algeria, it could take 5 days to clear the purchase, let alone for the goods to start moving. I think we need to improve on the payment systems to make those goods move. And then the final one is certainty in the regulatory environment. What can go in, what cannot go in. For us to trade better, we also need movement of people. People need to be able to move, and today we do not have an ease of movement. We do have sub-regional free entry of people into the sub-regions, but not collectively. And I think if Africans could move much more freer between countries, we would see a lot more trade happening.
So people and goods.
People and goods.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, you are very used to looking at the economies of the world and how they're interacting. I guess I'd love to put a very big question to you, which is how are you feeling about the global economy right now? What do you What, I don't know, opportunities do you see, problems do you see? How are things changing?
I think one of the biggest opportunities that we see today, I am an optimist, and you know, I come from a continent where, you know, 1 in every 2 people is below the age of 25, and you know, it's a huge youth population. We must be optimistic, and the optimism comes from the innovation, and 2 things are happening that could be quite amazing. One is the AI revolution, which is democratizing education, is democratizing science, is democratizing production. But the other, I think, is what is happening with our climate and our planet, right? And the whole sort of green growth. And we know that green growth, more resilient growth, we see weather events that are happening much more frequently that are destroying our economies. But the innovation to make our economies a lot more resilient is also present. And I think, you know, from Mozambique to Angola to Cameroon, you see all this innovation happening about how we can reach people, how you can deliver services better in, you know, climate challenged environments. And that is giving me a lot of hope, because again, if we begin to match and marry this AI innovation with, you know, a new kind of growth, a growth that is more resilient, a growth that sort of respects and protects nature, then we get a whole different conversation going about what kind of investment we need to make and how, you know, sustainable that investment is going to be. And the energy that you see this week here around these conversations and where we can get the resources. Yes, we need the financing for it. We need to work to make sure that when we get the financing, it's cheaper, and that the gap between, you know, what is needed and what, you know, we have, we can close that. I think there is still a lot of hope. There's a lot of people working towards these ideas. There's leaders who are determined to make it happen. And, you know, there's I think, a global collective that is going in the right direction, and makes me very, very comfortable that, yes, you know, growth is not linear. Development is not linear. There's going to be difficult times. And this time, I think there is no telling, it's particularly stressful. But out of stress and out of difficulty comes good solutions, good suggestions. And I think it offers the opportunity to question, you know, the existing, and maybe put on the table new things that people want to embrace and take forward.
What are some maybe examples of some of the innovation that you've seen that have made you optimistic?
So one of the innovations that I've seen that has made me very optimistic, without sort of doing any, it's just what you could do with learning. Let's take a very simple
education.
You know, education, large language models. I go again to AI, right? Now you can translate books into 58 different languages from, you know, I come from Cameroon. We speak 220 languages in just Cameroon. We have a population of 37 million people. So just imagine if we had to translate everything so that kids, and we have evidence that says that when kids, you know, from year 1 to year 7, learn in their local dialects and languages and cultures, they learn much faster. So maybe this is a way of, you know, impacting knowledge in a much faster way, because technology can translate that for you much faster. Now people will say, oh my gosh, you know, all those jobs are going to get lost. No. The fact that you can translate that much quicker means people can be more innovative much faster, and so we can create new tools and new technologies for some of the challenges that we've not been able to do. You take research, for example, DNA. You know, we have Nobel Prizes that have been awarded because people were able to sort of understand how to match DNA. But this was happening only in laboratories that had access to that information. Today, there is technology out there that allows for a scientist, you know, in the wilds of Mauritania or Senegal, to be able to analyze that DNA and do the same kind of scientific work that is happening in the best universities in the United States. That kind of democratization means, in the health sector, for example, we have something called forgotten diseases. Those are diseases that do not affect those in the wealthy parts of the world, and so there's not a lot of research that's done on them. But it's also because people don't have access to do the research. But if we can start doing the research, then we can find malaria, the cure for malaria in Republic of Congo, because there are scientists that don't need to travel to do the research. And that's what gives me hope, is that, you know, we're beginning to because of science, because of technology, because of infrastructure access, we can actually localize and find local solutions that become global because somebody's working on them every day because it's worrying them the most.
That's so interesting. I feel like here in the US, the conversations around AI are sort of equal parts fear-based, like you were saying, around job loss and also around the opportunity. But it sounds like you really see a lot of opportunity potential. And I'm also wondering if some of the trade barriers you're talking about could be helped by AI as well.
Of course, trading will happen almost seamlessly. I think if we went, again, in the banking sector is talk about, digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, is talk about stable coins that is going to help accelerate the trading system. But I think also that you mentioned the word, maybe not fear, but there has to be some caution. And I think the caution is around what we use the data for, how we use the data. And I give you an example. During COVID, we did, at the time I was at the Economic Commission for Africa, and we were sort of trying to make sure that the citizens on the continent were aware of what needed to be done around COVID and how you could, use your protective gear. And we found out that there was a lot of discussion about COVID in one particular country. And we thought, wow, everybody's talking about COVID and they know about COVID. But it was all misinformation. A lot of it was misinformation. And so, yes, everybody was using their phones. Everybody was, on.
The information was there.
But the information was there. It was the wrong information. And so I think there is something around making sure that people are getting the right information. And, when you're dealing with things like COVID, the wrong information can be very costly. And so I think that's an important part. The other thing is about data protection and who is using your data, where it's going. And there's a lot of effort on the continent today to make sure that, continental effort, information stays within the continent, because we're seeing, the new kinds of conflict are happening not with guns and bombs, but with information. And so we need to make sure that, information does not become the source of additional conflict, and how you manage that. I think there's been a lot of work. There was an AI summit, of course, in Paris. There's been a lot of discussion at the UN, and this is where the importance of multilateralism, this kinds of settings can help, structure and frame, what is the right degree of dissemination of AI and information, and what is private and what is personal, and who sort of polices that process. I think it's very important to have multilateral institutions that can help guide that.
In addition to AI and maybe to changing trade alliances, what are some of the biggest issues that you're looking at right now in the global economy that could affect growth and how people live?
The biggest issue for the continent is the cost of capital and the gap.
This is like the cost of borrowing money, essentially.
The cost of borrowing money. Yes, it's how expensive it is to build a road in a developing country, how expensive it is to get energy. Today, we still have about 600 million people on the African continent that do not have access to electricity, let alone access to enough energy to be able to power industry. To do that, we need investment. To do investment, we need to borrow resources, and the cost of borrowing those resources is very, very high. So interest rates remain very high on the continent. One way of being able to reduce those interest rates is to do, which is what I do now a lot of, is try to see whether we can increase the amount of money, liquidity, cash that is in the system. Because if there is a lot of it, then the prices go down, and so you can do a lot more investment much faster to meet and close the infrastructure gap, the human infrastructure gap, and sometimes the policy gap that's needed. So I think that's really the big debate that is happening, because if we can do that, then we grow. And essentially, if we grow faster, then our debt is, reduces. If we're investing well, then we can actually take some resources from that investment, because the investment is paying a return, and we can service our debt. And so, that whole equation around high debt cost and impossible to continue growing because we're spending a lot of money paying for money that we borrowed before, so we can put girls to school, we can make sure that the health systems work, will go away. And so I think really it starts with getting a lot more money at a lot cheaper cost so that we can do the infrastructure that's needed to unlock growth. And I think that's the problem that even the advanced economies are facing as well, is how do you unlock growth? Where do you get the capital to do that?
I mean, usually when it gets expensive to borrow money, it's because people perceive that there's risk involved. So in order to attract more money, what is the best way to do that? If you're trying to attract in different investors, how does that happen right now?
The three things again. And the first most important one is in the hands of governments. They need to make sure that the policy environment is clear. They need to make sure that they're putting in place the right policies. If I wanted to put my money in this economy, I know that tomorrow they are not going to decide that you can't take your money out. They're not going to decide that the investment that you made is nationalized. They're not going to decide.
It's trust
in a
government.
So you need that trust. You need that trust. You need that stability. You need the predictability. I think once you have that, then you say, okay, let's go and maybe do the infrastructure investment, the energy investment, because a lot of the cost of most goods is the cost of energy. You make that investment in the basic infrastructure that allows you to produce it or to take it to the port or to move it from point A to point B. That's the second part of it. And the final part of it is really human capacity, providing the wherewithal for people to be able to make sure that they have a good education and then they have good health and that they can live a prosperous life.
What is needed to increase trust, or what are some of the ways that like governmental trust can be improved?
One is results, I think, right? I mean, we make a lot of pronouncements. If you make pronouncements and people wait 1 year and 2 years and there's no results, I think you begin to lose trust. And so I think there's a lot of it that is people are rational, right? If you say something and then you do it and they see a positive result, they go, okay, fine, I can, next time he says something, I'll do that as well. And I think that's the most important, is the credibility. If it's going to be difficult, so we have countries on the continent that say, I can't do a 3% deficit, I need a 7% because I'm going to invest massively in infrastructure for the next 3 years.
Right.
So give me some space, I'm going to do this, but you're going to see the return. If you get that space and you do it, then people say, okay, well, yes, the deficit is a little bit high, but we're seeing the investment, it's useful investment, so we continue to trust. And so the markets, what we call the credit rating agencies, they would say, we give you a good grade. And that builds trust. And the more you do it, the more you build trust and the more you improve on sort of the investments that come into your economy.
I guess, what are your sort of any final thoughts? We have about a minute left. Any final thoughts of things standing in the way or opportunities that you're seeing right now around growth in the global economy, and particularly for countries in Africa?
The first message, I think, is really just the opportunity that the African continent represents. It is an investment waiting to happen. It's an investment with a very high return. I mean, the youth on the continent today, again, like I said, are innovative. They are going to be 1 in 4 people by 2050 is going to be from Africa. They'll be buying something you're producing. So if you're producing something today, that is your client.
This is the market that you need
to start targeting today, so that you continue to exist tomorrow. And so essentially, I think for that market, then this is for the investors. Now, for the market, you need to make yourself more attractive. You need to make sure then that the education system is delivering something that the market needs, is delivering the incomes. We saw a rise in incomes on the continent for a while, but then they're beginning to plateau. The only way that we have consumption is because people are earning a decent wage. And so essentially we need good jobs. We need good jobs so that the kids can stay on the continent, they can work on the continent and be happy. And so I think if we can fix and build that human capital, it's so critical. And finally, critical is the word, critical minerals. The production of critical minerals, the value addition of critical minerals. Like I said at the beginning, many African countries have one of the 50 critical minerals in the U.S. Minerals Act. We should stop exporting it in its raw form. We need to begin to transform those minerals on the continent. We need to add value on the continent. And the more we add value on the continent, the much more our prosperity, you get a higher markup by definition, and you see prosperity, you see innovation.
All right. Well, Dr. Songwe, thank you so much for your thoughts and your wisdom on the topic of global growth and for the work that you do. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here this evening. Now, if you have any questions or comments for me or for Dr. Songwe, there is a hashtag you can use if you want to post on social media. That is SDIM25. That is hashtag SDIM25. We would, of course, love to hear any thoughts or questions you have. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.